A seamstress with calloused hands and a heart of steel. A railroad magnate who owns half the city. One scandalous proposal that will shatter every rule of New York's Gilded Age society. What happens when pride meets power and a marriage contract becomes a battlefield? In 1892, New York City glittered with gold for some, while others barely survived in its shadows. Eleanor Hartwell knew her place, behind a sewing machine, stitching gowns for women who would never acknowledge her existence. Her father's death had left her family penniless, but she refused to beg. She worked 16-hour days, kept her chin high, and swore she would never depend on anyone's charity. Then came the night everything changed. At a society ball where she was delivering a dress, she caught the attention of someone dangerous, William Thornton Vandermeer, the most powerful railroad baron in America. He made her an offer that should have been a dream. Instead, it felt like a trap. What she didn't know was that accepting would pull her into a world of secrets, scandals, and a fight for her very survival. Subscribe to this channel and comment where you're watching from, because this story will take you on a journey you'll never forget. The needle pierced through silk with practiced precision. Eleanor Hartwell's fingers moved like clockwork, even as exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like iron chains. The small workshop smelled of damp wool and kerosene from the lamp that flickered on her table. Outside, the March wind howled through the narrow streets of the Lower East Side, but inside there was only the rhythm of work. "Eleanor, you'll ruin your eyes working in this light," her mother called from the back room, her voice weak from the cough that had plagued her all winter. "We need to finish Mrs. Caldwell's order by tomorrow morning, Mama. Rest yourself." Eleanor didn't look up. She couldn't afford to. Every stitch meant another penny toward the rent they owed, another day they could keep the roof over their heads. Since her father's accident at the rail yard 3 years ago, survival had become their only occupation. Thomas Hartwell had been a proud foreman, a man who believed in honest work and fair wages. His death beneath a collapsed scaffolding had left them with nothing but debts and promises from a company that never kept its word. The Vandermeer Railroad Company, to be exact. Eleanor pushed the thought away. Bitterness wouldn't feed her mother or her younger brother, James, who was currently hauling crates at the docks for 50 cents a day. At 19, she had become the family's backbone, and backbones didn't bend. Miss Hartwell, a knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson, the building's landlady, her face set in grim lines. "The rent's 3 days late. I'll have it by Friday. Mrs. Caldwell will pay when I deliver. Friday's too late. I've got other tenants waiting for this space. Good tenants, paying tenants." Mrs. Patterson's eyes held no sympathy. In the tenements, compassion was a luxury no one could afford. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "Give me until Friday, please," the landlady sighed. Friday morning, not a minute later. When the door closed, Eleanor leaned against it, allowing herself exactly 5 seconds of despair before returning to her work. She had learned that survival required a heart that could freeze when necessary and thaw only in the rarest moments of safety. Those moments were becoming rarer. The next afternoon, Eleanor carried the finished gown through the gates of the Caldwell mansion on 5th Avenue. The contrast between worlds always struck her like a physical blow. Here, the streets were clean. The air smelled of perfume instead of coal smoke, and every building proclaimed wealth with marble columns and brass fixtures that gleamed in the spring sunlight. The servant who answered the door looked at her with the particular disdain reserved for tradespeople. "Delivery entrance is around back. Mrs. Caldwell requested I bring it to her directly for final fitting." The servant's lips thinned, but she stepped aside. Eleanor followed her through hallways lined with paintings worth more than her family would earn in 10 lifetimes. Crystal chandeliers caught the light, scattering rainbows across walls papered in silk. This was the world her father had helped build with his sweat and blood, yet she could only enter through service doors. Mrs. Caldwell received her in a dressing room the size of Eleanor's entire apartment. The woman was 40, beautiful in the way only money could maintain, and utterly indifferent to the girl who had spent 2 weeks creating her ball gown. "Hold it up, let me see." Eleanor displayed the dress, emerald silk with hand-embroidered roses, each petal requiring 30 minutes of meticulous work. Mrs. Caldwell examined it with the expression of someone inspecting vegetables at market. "The waist is too loose." "I followed your measurements exactly, Mrs. Caldwell. Are you suggesting I've gained weight?" The woman's voice turned cold. Eleanor bit back her response. Pride was expensive and she couldn't afford it. "I can adjust it immediately. It will take 20 minutes. See that you do." She worked in a corner of the dressing room while Mrs. Caldwell and her friends prepared for the evening's ball. Their conversation washed over Eleanor like water over stone. Gossip about who was courting whom, which families were rising or falling. The latest scandals whispered behind gloved hands. "Did you hear about William Thornton Vandermeer?" one woman said, her voice pitched with excitement. Eleanor's needle paused for a fraction of a second. "What about him?" Mrs. Caldwell asked. "They say he's finally looking for a wife. After rejecting every suitable girl in New York for the past 5 years, the man is apparently ready to settle down. He can afford to be particular. The Vandermeer fortune is the largest in the state. Larger than Astor." My dear, the Vandermeers make the Astors look like shopkeepers." Laughter rippled through the room. Eleanor resumed her stitching, her jaw tight. The Vandermeer name was acid in her mouth. That family's wealth had been built on the backs of men like her father. And when those men died, the Vandermeers paid for silence instead of justice. "They say he's absolutely ruthless in business," and another woman contributed, "but devastatingly handsome." "What good is handsome when the man treats social events like business negotiations? I've never seen him smile at a ball." "Perhaps he's waiting for someone worth smiling at." More laughter. Eleanor tied off the final stitch with more force than necessary. "It's finished, Mrs. Caldwell." The woman tried on the gown, turning before the mirror. "Adequate, Mary. Pay her." The maid handed Eleanor an envelope. She didn't count it in front of them. That would betray desperation, but the weight felt wrong. In the hallway, she opened it. $20 instead of the 30 they'd agreed upon. Her hands shook with rage as she returned to the dressing room. "Mrs. Caldwell, the payment is incorrect. I deducted for the inconvenience of the alteration." "The alteration was due to your error, not mine. We agreed on $30. The room fell silent. Mrs. Caldwell turned, her eyes narrowing. "Are you calling me a liar? I'm stating a fact." "How dare you?" The woman's face flushed with indignation. "Get out before I have you thrown out." Eleanor stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Not without the payment I earned. Mary, fetch someone to remove this insolent girl." But Eleanor had already turned, walking toward the door with her head high. She might leave without her full wages, but she wouldn't leave without her dignity. That was the one thing they couldn't take. She made it to the grand foyer before the tears threatened. The injustice burned in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Crying wouldn't pay the rent. Nothing would pay the rent now. They were going to lose everything. "Miss," she turned to find a butler approaching, his face carefully neutral. "Mrs. Caldwell asked me to give you this." He held out an envelope. Eleanor took it, confused, and opened it to find $30, the full amount. "Mrs. Caldwell realized her error," the butler said quietly. "She apologizes for the misunderstanding." Eleanor understood immediately. The woman hadn't experienced a sudden attack of conscience. She'd realized that a seamstress who stood up to her might also talk about her, and reputation was everything to these people. The extra payment was hush money. "Thank you," Eleanor said, pocketing the money. She would take it, but she wouldn't forget. As she left the mansion, night was falling over the city. Gas lamps flickered to life along Fifth Avenue, turning the street into a river of gold. Carriages rattled past, carrying glittering passengers toward evening entertainments. This was the hour when the city's two worlds existed in sharpest contrast, the brilliant surface and the dark underbelly. Eleanor walked quickly, wanting to reach the tenements before full darkness fell. The money in her pocket felt heavy with possibility. It would cover the rent and food for 2 weeks, maybe 3, if they were careful. She allowed herself a moment of hope. That was when she heard the scream. It came from an alley between 2 townhouses, sharp and terrified. Eleanor stopped, every instinct telling her to keep walking. In this city, survival meant minding your own business. But the scream came again, younger this time, and suddenly she was running toward it. The alley was dark, but she could make out shapes. 3 men surrounding a figure pressed against the wall. A boy, she realized, maybe 14 years old. Leave him alone. Eleanor's voice came out stronger than she felt. The men turned. One laughed. Look, boys, a little bird wants to play hero. I'll scream. The houses on either side will hear. Scream all you want, sweetheart. People on Fifth Avenue don't care what happens in alleys. He was right, and they both knew it. Eleanor's mind raced, searching for options that didn't exist. Then she heard the voice. The lady asked you to leave. A man stepped into the alley entrance, blocking the light from the street. Eleanor couldn't see his face, only his silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat that cost more than she made in a year. His voice carried the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The 3 men hesitated. One of them squinted at the newcomer. This ain't your business, mister. I'm making it my business. Leave now. Something in his tone made the threat real. The men exchanged glances, then slipped past him and disappeared into the street. The boy bolted in the opposite direction without a word of thanks. Eleanor was left alone with her unexpected rescuer. He stepped forward, and the light from a nearby window caught his face. Eleanor's breath stopped. She knew that face. Everyone in New York knew that face. It appeared in newspapers, in society photographs, in the nightmares of workers who'd been crushed by his business decisions. William Thornton Vandermeer stood 3 feet away from her, studying her with eyes the color of steel. Are you hurt? He asked. I'm fine. Her voice came out cold, defensive. This man's company had killed her father. This man's family had paid $50 to bury the incident along with the body. You took a significant risk interfering. That was either brave or foolish. Perhaps both. Eleanor moved to leave, but he shifted, blocking her path. I know you. Her heart kicked against her ribs. I don't think so. You were at the Caldwell house tonight. I saw you leaving. His gaze sharpened. You're the seamstress Mrs. Caldwell was complaining about, the one who demanded proper payment. Heat rushed to Eleanor's face. I demanded what I was owed, nothing more, and you got it. A hint of amusement touched his mouth. Mrs. Caldwell doesn't usually back down. You must have made quite an impression. If you'll excuse me. What's your name? That's none of your concern. Humor me. Eleanor met his eyes, seeing the arrogance there, the absolute confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted. Eleanor Hartwell. She watched his face for recognition. Hartwell. Thomas Hartwell. The foreman who died building your railroad. But his expression didn't change. Of course it didn't. He probably didn't even know her father's name. Well, Miss Hartwell, you should be more careful. This city is dangerous for women alone after dark. I'm aware, Mr. Vandermeer. His eyebrows rose. You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are, and yet you don't seem impressed. Should I be? The words escaped before she could stop them. Impressed by wealth built on the backs of men who die in your rail yards, by mansions purchased with wages stolen from workers' families, by power that crushes anyone too weak to fight back. The air between them turned electric. Eleanor realized she'd gone too far, said too much. This man could destroy what little she had left with a single word. But she couldn't take it back, and part of her didn't want to. Vandermeer studied her for a long moment. Instead of anger, something else flickered in his eyes. Interest. You have strong opinions about me. I have accurate opinions about your company. Did Vandermeer Railroad do something to you personally? Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. 3 years ago, a foreman named Thomas Hartwell died when scaffolding collapsed at your 59th Street construction site. The company paid his widow $50 and told her to be grateful. That foreman was my father. The words hung in the cold air like smoke. Vandermeer's expression finally changed, but Eleanor couldn't read it. Surprise? Regret? Calculation? I see. Do you? Her voice shook. Do you see my mother coughing herself to death in a tenement because we can't afford a doctor? Do you see my brother working the docks at 15 because your company won't honor the pension you promised? Do you see me sewing until my fingers bleed, trying to survive in a city that only values us when we're useful? Miss Hartwell, my father was a good man. He believed in fair work for fair wages. He believed your company's promises. He died believing them. But we know better now. She pushed past him, her vision blurring with angry tears. She'd said too much, revealed too much. Tomorrow she might pay for it. But tonight, she didn't care. Miss Hartwell, wait. She kept walking. Eleanor, the use of her first name stopped her. She turned and was startled to find him closer than she'd expected. The streetlight caught the planes of his face, and for a moment she saw past the powerful railroad magnate to something more complex, something almost human. I'm sorry about your father. Your apology changes nothing. No, he agreed, but perhaps I can. I don't want your charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering something else entirely. He paused as if weighing his words. How would you like to never worry about rent again? To afford the best doctors for your mother? To ensure your brother finishes his education? Eleanor's mouth went dry. What are you suggesting? Meet me tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock, the Astoria Hotel restaurant. We'll discuss it properly. I'm not interested in improper proposals, Mr. Vandermeer. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. What I'm proposing is entirely proper, scandalous perhaps, but proper. He pulled a card from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Come hear what I have to say. If you don't like it, walk away. No obligations. He tipped his hat and disappeared into the night, leaving Eleanor standing alone with a business card burning in her palm and 1,000 questions spinning in her mind. She looked down at the card. William Thornton Vandermeer, President, Vandermeer Railroad Company. What could he possibly want with a seamstress who hated him? Eleanor walked home through streets that suddenly felt charged with possibility and danger. Whatever Vandermeer was planning, it couldn't be good. Men like him didn't help people like her out of kindness. There was always a price. But as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, passing neighbors whose eyes held the same exhaustion and defeat she saw in the mirror every morning, she knew she would go to that meeting, not because she trusted him, but because sometimes the only way to survive was to walk straight into the trap and bet everything you had that you were clever enough to spring it from the inside. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, she would hear what William Thornton Vandermeer had to say, and God help them both. Eleanor stood outside the Astoria Hotel, wearing her only good dress, a navy wool that she'd sewn herself 3 years ago. It was clean, well-made, and utterly inadequate for this building. Doormen in gold-trimmed uniforms flanked the entrance like sentries guarding a fortress. Through the glass doors, she glimpsed a lobby of impossible opulence. Marble columns, velvet furniture, chandeliers that looked like captured starlight. She almost turned around. Pride warred with desperation in her chest. Pride insisted she had nothing to prove to William Vandermeer. Desperation whispered that her mother's cough had gotten worse last night, and the rent was due again next week. Desperation won. The doorman's eyes swept over her with practiced assessment, cataloguing every sign of her poverty. But he opened the door without comment, and Eleanor stepped into another world. The restaurant occupied the hotel's east wing, all crystal and candlelight. A maitre d' approached, his expression shifting from welcome to suspicion as he took in her appearance. "May I help you? I'm meeting Mr. Vandermeer." The suspicion vanished, replaced by careful neutrality. "Of course, this way please." He led her through the dining room, and Eleanor felt every eye follow her progress. She recognized the weight of those stares, judgment wrapped in curiosity, a working girl in their territory. She lifted her chin and met their gazes directly, refusing to look away first. Vandermeer sat at a corner table that commanded a view of the entire room. He stood as she approached, and she was struck again by his physical presence. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that missed nothing. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Miss Hartwell, thank you for coming. I haven't agreed to anything yet." "Of course not." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." She did, acutely aware of the linen napkin that probably cost more than her dress, the silver that gleamed with the light of 100 careful polishings. A waiter materialized immediately. "Wine, miss?" "Water, please." When they were alone, Vandermeer studied her with unsettling directness. "I appreciate your honesty last night." "It's rare." "You mean it's rare for someone to tell you the truth about your company?" "Truth is relative in my world. Everyone has an agenda." "And what's yours, Mr. Vandermeer?" He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I need a wife." Eleanor blinked. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't this. "I'm sorry. I need to marry soon, and I'm proposing that you become my wife." For several seconds, Eleanor could only stare at him. Then she laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "You're insane. I'm entirely serious. You don't even know me. We met 12 hours ago. I know enough. You're intelligent, you're brave, and you don't want my money, which makes you uniquely qualified for what I need." "What you need," Eleanor repeated slowly, "is a doctor, not a wife." Vandermeer's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Let me explain. My grandfather wrote a will with very specific conditions. If I don't marry before my 30th birthday, control of the Vandermeer Railroad Company passes to my cousin, Marcus. And Marcus is a fool who will destroy in 5 years what 3 generations built. But more importantly, he's a cruel fool. Under his leadership, conditions for workers will deteriorate even further. Safety measures will disappear. Men like your father will die in greater numbers, and their families will get nothing." Eleanor's fingers tightened on her water glass. "You're trying to appeal to my sympathy for workers? After what your company did to my family? I'm trying to appeal to your intelligence. The current situation is terrible. Under Marcus, it will become unconscionable." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I'm not a good man, Miss Hartwell. I'm ruthless in business, I'm cold when necessary, and I've made decisions that haunt me. But I'm not Marcus. And if you help me retain control of the company, I can ensure that no more families suffer what yours did." Pretty words. Provable actions. Marry me and I'll immediately reform the company's labor policies. Full pensions for families of workers killed on the job, medical care for injured employees, safety inspections by independent engineers. Every promise my father made and never kept, I'll honor. Eleanor's heart was pounding. "Why would you do that?" "Because Marcus won't, and because," he hesitated, something flickering across his face. "Because you were right last night. The company was built on the backs of men who deserved better. It's time to change that. And all you need is a wife for this moral awakening. My 30th birthday is in 3 months. The will stipulates I must be married by then. After 1 year, we can divorce quietly. You'll receive a settlement of $100,000. Your mother will have the best medical care available, and your brother will have a trust fund for education. Everyone benefits. $100,000. The number echoed in Eleanor's mind like a bell. That kind of money meant freedom, security, everything her family had lost when her father died. "And what do you get?" she asked. "The company, the ability to run it as I see fit, and—" He paused. "The satisfaction of beating Marcus at his own game. This isn't about workers' rights at all. This is about family politics. It's about both. The two aren't mutually exclusive." The waiter arrived with their food, dishes Eleanor couldn't have named, plated like art. She looked down at her plate, then back at Vandermeer. "If I agreed to this insanity, what would the terms be?" "A legal marriage. You'd live in my house, attend social events as my wife, and maintain the appearance of a conventional marriage. In private, you'd have your own quarters and complete independence. After 1 year, we divorce, citing incompatibility. No scandal, no gossip, just a quiet legal dissolution. And if I refuse, then I'll find someone else. But it won't be someone who challenges me the way you do. It won't be someone who understands what's at stake for the workers. It will be a society girl who sees this as a business transaction and nothing more." Eleanor picked up her fork, more to give her hands something to do than from any appetite. "You're asking me to lie, to pretend love where there is none. I'm asking you to play a role for a year. Surely a woman who survived 3 years of poverty can survive 1 year of luxury. Luxury bought with a lie. Every marriage in our society is bought with lies, Miss Hartwell. The only difference is that we're honest about ours." She hated that he had a point. She'd sewn enough wedding gowns to know that society marriages had nothing to do with love and everything to do with money, power, and social position. At least Vandermeer wasn't pretending otherwise. "I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night. That's when I'm attending the Whitmore Ball, where I'll be expected to show interest in potential wives. If you're not there as my fiancé, I'll have to begin courting someone else." "That's not enough time." "It's the time we have. Life rarely provides adequate preparation, Miss Hartwell. We adapt or we fail." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This contains a contract outlining everything I've promised. Have a lawyer review it if you wish, though I doubt you can afford one. It's all legally binding." Eleanor took the envelope, her mind spinning. "And if I attend this ball, arrive at 8 o'clock. I'll announce our engagement at 9. By morning, all of New York will know you're about to become Mrs. William Thornton Vandermeer." Just like that, just like that. His eyes held hers. "I won't pretend this is romantic, Miss Hartwell. It's a business arrangement, but it's an arrangement that can change both our lives, and perhaps save a few others in the process." Eleanor stood, tucking the envelope into her bag. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow night, or I won't come at all." "Fair enough." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Mr. Vandermeer, if I agree to this, if I become your wife, even temporarily, you'll keep every promise in that contract, every single one. You have my word. The word of a man who would buy a wife to win a business dispute. The word of a man who's offering you a way out of poverty, which is worth more depends entirely on your perspective." Eleanor left the restaurant with her head high and her thoughts in chaos. Outside, the spring evening had turned cold, and she wrapped her thin coat tighter as she walked. The envelope in her bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. At home, she found her mother asleep, her breathing labored and painful. James sat at the table, his hands wrapped in bandages from rope burns. He was 15 and looked 30, all the youth ground out of him by hard labor. "How was work?" Eleanor asked. "Same as always. One of the men fell, broke his leg. They fired him on the spot." James's voice held bitter acceptance. "Told him he should have been more careful." Eleanor thought of Vandermeer's promises, reformed labor policies, medical care, safety inspections. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone who came from that world? But what choice did she have? She waited until James went to bed, then lit a lamp and opened the envelope. The contract was exactly as Vandermeer described. Clear, specific, legally binding. If he violated any term, she could sue for damages. If she violated any term, she forfeited her settlement. At the bottom, space for 2 signatures. Eleanor read it 3 times, searching for loopholes, hidden clauses, any sign of deception. The contract seemed straightforward, almost too straightforward. She thought about her father, who had trusted a railroad company's promises and died for it. She thought about her mother, coughing blood into rags because they couldn't afford a doctor. She thought about James, destroying his body for pennies because no other work was available. And she thought about William Thornton Vandermeer, sitting in his expensive restaurant, offering her everything she needed wrapped in a proposition that made her skin crawl. A year of her life for financial security, a year of pretending to love a man she had every reason to hate, a year of living in a world that had never wanted her and never would, but a year that might save her family. Eleanor picked up a pen, then set it down. This wasn't a decision to make alone, no matter how much she wanted to protect her family from the burden of choice. "Mama," she called softly. Her mother stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Eleanor, what time is it?" "Late. I need to talk to you about something." Over the next hour, Eleanor explained everything. Her mother listened without interrupting, her face growing paler, but her eyes remaining sharp. When Eleanor finished, silence filled the small room. "He's a Vandermeer," her mother finally said. "I know. Their company killed your father. I know that too. And you're considering this." "I don't know what else to do, Mama. We're drowning. This is a lifeline, even if it's attached to a hook." Her mother reached out, taking Eleanor's hand. Her grip was weak but steady. "Your father would hate this. He would hate you sacrificing yourself for money. Papa's dead. We're not. And I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm making a trade. 1 year for the rest of our lives. And what happens to you in that year, living with a man you despise, pretending to be someone you're not?" "I survive, like I've survived everything else." Her mother studied her for a long moment. "You're stronger than I ever was, stronger than your father. But strength has a cost, Eleanor. Don't let this make you hard. Hard keeps us alive. And what good is survival if you lose yourself in the process?" Eleanor had no answer for that. She kissed her mother's forehead and returned to her room, where she sat by the window and watched the city sleep. Somewhere out there, William Vandermeer was probably sleeping in silk sheets, untroubled by the chaos he'd created in her life. Tomorrow night, she would either walk into the Whitmore ball and become his fiancée, or she would return to her sewing machine and watch her family slowly crumble. The choice should have been impossible. Instead, it was terrifyingly simple. At dawn, Eleanor made her decision. She spent the day sewing with furious intensity, finishing 3 orders and starting a 4th. Work steadied her hands and silenced her doubts. By evening, she had earned enough for 2 weeks of rent and food, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. At 7 o'clock, she put on her navy dress, brushed her hair until it shone, and pinched her cheeks for color. In the mirror, she looked like what she was, a poor girl pretending to be something more. "You look beautiful," James said from the doorway. "I look terrified." "That too." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She arrived at the Whitmore mansion at 8 o'clock exactly. The building blazed with light, every window a declaration of wealth. Carriages lined the street, depositing passengers in gowns worth more than Eleanor would earn in a lifetime. She stood on the sidewalk, watching them, wondering if she could really do this. Then she thought of her mother's cough, her brother's bandaged hands, her father's grave in a pauper's cemetery. She climbed the steps. A butler blocked her path. "Invitation, miss." "I'm here to see Mr. Vandermeer." "Mr. Vandermeer is entertaining guests. If you have a message, Eleanor." She turned to find Vandermeer standing in the doorway, impeccably dressed in evening clothes that transformed him from powerful to devastating. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. "She's with me," he told the butler, then offered her his arm. "Shall we?" Eleanor placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric. "I haven't agreed yet, but you're here. That's answer enough." He led her inside, into a world of impossible beauty. The ballroom glittered with crystal and gold, filled with the cream of New York society. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them, curiosity sharpening to shock as they recognized Eleanor from... where? The girl who delivered dresses, the seamstress who'd argued with Mrs. Caldwell. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Vandermeer guided her to the center of the ballroom, his hand steady on her arm. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. There was no turning back. He raised his hand, and the orchestra fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vandermeer's voice carried across the ballroom with easy authority, "I have an announcement to make." The whispers died, every eye fixed on them with predatory interest. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell has agreed to become my wife." The ballroom exploded with sound, gasps, exclamations, a few nervous laughs. Eleanor stood frozen, feeling the weight of 100 judgments, 1,000 questions. She saw Mrs. Caldwell's face go white with shock, saw society matrons clutch their pearls as if Eleanor's presence might contaminate them, and she saw Marcus Vandermeer standing at the edge of the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "Smile," Vandermeer murmured in her ear. "You're supposed to look happy." Eleanor forced her lips into something approximating joy, but inside she was screaming. What had she done? What had she agreed to? This wasn't a simple business arrangement anymore. This was war, and she'd just become the weapon in someone else's fight. The orchestra resumed playing, and Vandermeer drew her into a waltz. Eleanor had never learned formal dancing, but he guided her through the steps with practiced ease, making her look more graceful than she felt. "They hate me," she whispered. "They're terrified of you. There's a difference." "Why would they be terrified?" "Because you're an unknown variable. You don't follow their rules, and that makes you dangerous." His eyes held something that might have been approval. "I chose well. You chose a weapon. I chose a partner. Whether you become a weapon depends entirely on what you decide to do with this opportunity." The waltz ended, and immediately they were surrounded. Society's elite pressed close, their smiles sharp as knives, their questions veiled attacks. "Miss Hartwell, what a surprise. We had no idea Mr. Vandermeer was courting anyone. Where exactly is your family from, dear?" Eleanor met each question with unflinching directness. "My family is from New York. My father worked for Mr. Vandermeer's railroad. I'm a seamstress." The honesty shocked them more than any lie would have. Several women actually stepped back, as if poverty might be contagious. "A seamstress," one woman repeated. "How quaint, how practical," Eleanor corrected. "I support my family through honest work. Is that not something to be proud of?" Vandermeer's hand tightened slightly on her waist. Warning or encouragement, she couldn't tell. "Of course," the woman stammered. "I merely meant—" "She meant no offense," another woman interrupted smoothly. "We're simply surprised. Mr. Vandermeer has rejected every eligible girl in New York, and now he chooses someone completely outside our circle. It's very unexpected. Perhaps that's why he chose me," Eleanor said, meeting Vandermeer's eyes. "Because I'm not like you." She heard his sharp intake of breath, saw something flicker in his expression. She'd drawn a line in the sand, forced him to choose sides. Would he support her or abandon her to their mockery? Vandermeer smiled, slow and genuine. "Exactly right. I didn't want someone like everyone else. I wanted someone extraordinary." The crowd parted as Marcus Vandermeer pushed through. He was perhaps 25, handsome in a soft way that suggested he'd never worked a day in his life. But his eyes held malice. "Cousin, how wonderful. You found someone desperate enough to marry you." His gaze raked over Eleanor with obvious contempt, though I suppose when you're facing poverty, even a loveless arrangement with a cold bastard seems appealing. "Marcus." Vandermeer's voice went cold as winter. "You're drunk." "I'm honest," There's a difference. Marcus turned to Eleanor. Has he told you why he really needs a wife, sweetheart? It's not romance. It's money. You're just a convenient solution to a legal problem. I'm aware, Eleanor said calmly. Mr. Vandermeer and I have been completely honest with each other. Can you say the same about your relationships? Marcus's face flushed with anger. You little... Careful. Vandermeer's voice carried absolute warning. You're speaking to my fiancé. Show respect or leave. Respect for a fortune-hunting seamstress. I'm not hunting fortune, Eleanor said quietly. I'm accepting an offer. There's a difference. The crowd had gone silent, everyone straining to hear. This was scandal unfolding in real time, and they were hungry for every detail. Marcus laughed, cruel and sharp. An offer? How delicate. I wonder what the workers at the railroad would think, knowing the boss married someone from their own class. Would they celebrate, or would they see it for what it is? Manipulation dressed as compassion. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow because he was right. That's exactly what this was. She'd been so focused on survival that she hadn't considered how this would look to people like her father. A working girl selling out to the very company that had destroyed her family. She felt sick. Vandermeer stepped forward, his voice dropping to a tone Eleanor had never heard before. Leave now, before I forget we're family and treat you like any other man who insults my future wife. For a moment Marcus looked ready to fight. Then he saw something in Vandermeer's eyes that made him step back. This isn't over, Marcus said. Yes, Vandermeer replied, it is. Marcus left, and the crowd's whispers erupted into open conversation. Eleanor stood in the center of it all, feeling like she was drowning. This was a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. I need air, she whispered. Vandermeer immediately guided her toward the terrace, away from the staring eyes and poisonous whispers. Outside, the night was cool and blessedly quiet. Eleanor gripped the marble railing, trying to steady herself. I can't do this. You already are. I mean, I won't. This was wrong. I should never have come here. Vandermeer moved beside her, his voice surprisingly gentle. Marcus is a bastard. Don't let him win. He's not wrong, though. I am selling out. I'm becoming exactly what everyone thinks I am, a poor girl using a rich man for money. And I'm a rich man using a poor girl to win a legal battle. We're equally mercenary. That's what makes this fair. Eleanor laughed bitterly. Fair? Nothing about this is fair. No, he agreed, but it's honest. And sometimes that's the best we can manage. She turned to look at him, really look at him. In the moonlight, away from the ballroom's glare, he seemed less like an untouchable magnate and more like a man bearing burdens he never asked for. Why me? She asked. You could have chosen anyone. Someone who knows your world, who would make this easier. Because easy isn't what I need. I need someone strong enough to survive what's coming. I need someone who won't break when society turns its back. He paused. I need someone who understands what it costs to survive. And if I break anyway, then I'll help you heal. That's what partners do. Eleanor wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. When do we sign the contract? She asked. Tomorrow. My lawyers will draw up the paperwork. And then? And then you move into my house, we plan a wedding, and we convince New York that we're madly in love. He smiled slightly. Think you can manage that? I'm an excellent liar when I need to be. Good. So am I. They stood together in the darkness, two liars about to build a marriage on deception. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like the only honest thing either of them had done in years. We should go back inside, Vandermeer said finally. Give them something to talk about. They're already talking. Then let's give them something worth talking about. He offered his arm, and Eleanor took it. Together they walked back into the ballroom, into the light and the stairs, and the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. She was done being the poor seamstress who accepted her lot. If society wanted to judge her, Let them. She would survive their judgment the same way she'd survived everything else, by refusing to break. The engagement announcement appeared in every newspaper the next morning. Eleanor read them all, sitting in the empty workshop that would soon be part of her past. The articles ranged from cautiously optimistic to openly hostile. Vandermeer heir chooses love over status. Shocking alliance. Railroad baron to wed working girl. Society reels as magnate announces engagement to unknown seamstress unknown, as if being poor made her invisible. A knock interrupted her reading. She opened the door to find a man in expensive clothes holding a leather portfolio. "Miss Hartwell? I'm Jonathan Hughes, Mr. Vandermeer's personal attorney. I have documents for your review." Eleanor led him to the table, clearing away fabric scraps to make room. Hughes laid out papers with practiced efficiency: the marriage contract, property agreements, financial arrangements. Everything Vandermeer had promised, codified into legal language. "This is very generous," Hughes said carefully. "Mr. Vandermeer is settling $100,000 on you, plus a monthly allowance of $500 during the marriage. Upon divorce, you retain the full settlement and all gifts given during the marriage. Your family receives immediate medical care and educational trusts, and in exchange, you maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage. You attend social functions as his wife. You do not embarrass him publicly or engage in affairs during the marriage term. Standard conditions. Standard for a business transaction masquerading as matrimony." Eleanor read every line, searching for traps. Hughes waited patiently, answering her questions with professional courtesy. When she finally signed, her hand shook only slightly. "Welcome to the family, Miss Hartwell." The family. As if she'd ever be anything but an outsider. That afternoon, a modiste arrived with assistants carrying dozens of dress boxes. "Mr. Vandermeer sent me. You'll need an entirely new wardrobe." Eleanor wanted to refuse, but pride was a luxury she'd surrendered. She stood while they measured, pinned, and discussed her like furniture being reupholstered. The waist must be smaller. Her posture needs work. Can anything be done about her hands? Eleanor looked down at her hands, calloused, scarred from needle pricks, permanently stained with thread dye. Working hands. Honest hands. Hands that told the truth about who she was. "My hands are fine as they are," she said firmly. The modiste's lips pursed. "As you wish, Miss Hartwell." By evening, Eleanor had 12 new gowns, 6-day dresses, riding habits she'd never use, and undergarments made of silk so fine they felt like air against her skin. The cost would have fed her family for 5 years. The next morning, a carriage arrived to take her to Vandermeer House. Eleanor said goodbye to her mother and brother in the cramped apartment that had been home. "You don't have to do this," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I do." Eleanor held her tight. "A doctor will visit you this afternoon. Let him help you, Mama, please." James stood awkwardly by the door, too proud to cry, but close to it. "If he hurts you, he won't. This is business, nothing more." But as the carriage rolled through Manhattan streets, leaving poverty behind and entering the realm of impossible wealth, Eleanor wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Vandermeer House occupied an entire block on Fifth Avenue. The mansion was a palace of white marble and wrought iron, with gardens that seemed obscene in their manicured perfection. Servants in crisp uniforms lined the entrance like soldiers. Vandermeer met her in the foyer, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Here, in his territory, he seemed even more formidable. This was his world, and she was an intruder. "Welcome home," he said. "This isn't my home, it's your house. For the next year it's both." He gestured to an older woman standing nearby. "This is Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper. She'll show you to your rooms and explain the household routine." Mrs. Davies had the face of someone who'd seen everything and approved of nothing. Her gaze swept over Eleanor with clinical assessment. "This way, miss." Eleanor followed her up a grand staircase that could have fit her entire apartment on each step. The second floor was a maze of hallways lined with paintings worth fortunes. Mrs. Davies opened a door to reveal a suite of rooms that took Eleanor's breath away. The bedroom alone was larger than her family's apartment. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in silk the color of cream. Windows overlooked the garden. A dressing room connected to a bathroom with hot running water and a tub the size of a small boat. "These are your private quarters," Mrs. Davies said. "Mr. Vandermeer's rooms are at the opposite end of the hall. You'll share the study and drawing room for entertaining, but otherwise your spaces are separate." "Where will I eat?" "In the formal dining room. With Mr. Vandermeer. Breakfast at 8, dinner at 7, unless you prefer a tray in your room." The unspoken message was clear. A real wife would eat with her husband. A bought wife might hide in her room. "I'll dine with Mr. Vandermeer." Mrs. Davies' expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Respect? Contempt? Eleanor couldn't tell. "Your lady's maid will be Mary. She'll help you dress and manage your wardrobe. If you need anything, ring the bell." When Eleanor was alone, she walked through the rooms like a ghost haunting a museum. Everything was beautiful, and nothing was hers. She touched the silk curtains, the velvet chair, the crystal vase holding fresh roses. Each object whispered the same message: "You don't belong here." A knock interrupted her exploration. A young woman entered, curtsying quickly. "Miss Hartwell, I'm Mary, your maid." She was perhaps 20, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Eleanor felt a rush of relief. At least one person in this house didn't look at her like an infection. "Please, just call me Eleanor." Mary's eyes widened. "Oh, I couldn't, miss. It wouldn't be proper." "Proper?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Nothing about this situation is proper, Mary. But if you insist, I'll call you Mary, and you'll call me Miss, and we'll both pretend this makes sense." Mary smiled tentatively. "As you wish, miss. Should I help you dress for dinner?" Eleanor looked down at her traveling dress, one of the new ones, but still conservative by the standards of this house. "Is this not acceptable? Mr. Vandermeer usually dresses formally for dinner, even when dining alone." Of course he did. Eleanor allowed Mary to help her into an evening gown of deep blue silk that made her feel like an imposter playing dress-up. Mary arranged her hair in a style Eleanor had only seen in magazines, then stepped back. "You look beautiful, miss." Eleanor looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman who could almost pass for society if you didn't look too closely at her eyes. Dinner was served in a room designed to seat 30. Eleanor sat at one end of a table long enough to host a small army, while Vandermeer sat at the other end, so distant she had to raise her voice to be heard. "Is this really necessary?" she called. "Is what necessary?" Sitting in different postal codes, we could eat in the kitchen and actually have a conversation. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. We could, but the servants would talk. The servants are already talking. I'm sure the entire staff knows exactly what this marriage is. Probably, but there's a difference between knowing and seeing confirmed. We maintain appearances, Eleanor. That's the agreement. She hated that he was right. They ate in silence, separated by 15 feet of polished mahogany and a chasm of class difference that no contract could bridge. After dinner, Vandermeer led her to his study. The room smelled of leather and tobacco, masculine and intimidating. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, offering her one. "I don't drink." "Tonight you do. We need to talk, and this conversation will be easier with alcohol." Eleanor took the glass, sipping carefully. The liquid burned, but warmth spread through her chest. Vandermeer settled into a chair, studying her over the rim of his glass. "We're getting married in 2 weeks." Eleanor nearly choked. 2 weeks? That's impossible. It's necessary. The longer we wait, the more time society has to dig into your background and create problems. A quick wedding suggests passion, not calculation. "But 2 weeks. I've hired a wedding planner. You'll meet with her tomorrow." She'll handle everything, the church, the flowers, the reception. All you need to do is show up and smile and pretend I'm in love. Exactly. Eleanor drained her brandy, welcoming the burn. What else do I need to know? We'll be expected to attend social events together, dinners, balls, theatre performances. You'll need to learn the rules of society. I'm a quick study. I know. That's one reason I chose you. He refilled her glass despite her protest. But there's more. My world is vicious, Eleanor. These people will smile to your face and destroy you behind your back. They'll test you constantly, looking for weakness. I've survived worse than social gossip. Have you? His eyes were serious. These people have power, real power. They can ruin reputations, destroy businesses, turn entire communities against someone. And they'll aim all of it at you because you're an outsider who dared to breach their walls. Then why bring me into this? Because I need someone strong enough to withstand them, someone who won't crumble when things get difficult. He leaned forward. Can you do that, Eleanor? Can you be Mrs. William Vandermeer for 1 year, no matter what they throw at you? Eleanor met his gaze, seeing the challenge there. He was testing her even now, wondering if she would break before the wedding even happened. I can do anything for a year, she said quietly. I've done harder things for less reward. Good. He stood, crossing to his desk. Then let's begin your education. These are the names and family trees of the 50 most important families in New York society. Memorize them. Know who's allied with whom, who's feuding, who has secrets they'd kill to protect. He dropped a thick folder on the table. Eleanor stared at it. You want me to memorize 50 families in 2 weeks? I want you to survive. This is how you do it. Know your enemies better than they know themselves. Over the next week, Eleanor became a student of society. She memorized names, relationships, scandals. She learned which fork to use for which course, how to enter a room, how to curtsy just enough to show respect without displaying subservience. Mary helped, coaching her through the intricacies of etiquette with patient kindness. Remember, miss, never speak first to someone of higher social standing. Wait for them to acknowledge you. Everyone is higher social standing than me. And any more, you're marrying Mr. Vandermeer. That puts you near the top of the hierarchy. The thought was absurd. Eleanor Hartwell, seamstress, at the top of society's ladder. It would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. The wedding planner was a whirlwind named Mrs. Ashford, who treated the wedding like a military campaign. Eleanor sat through hours of discussions about flowers, music, guest lists, menu options. She nodded and agreed, feeling disconnected from it all. This wedding had nothing to do with her. It was a performance for an audience that would never accept her. And for your something borrowed, Mrs. Ashford said, perhaps a piece of Vandermeer family jewelry. Eleanor thought of the simple gold band her father had given her mother. That was what she wanted to wear, but that wasn't part of the script. Whatever Mr. Vandermeer thinks appropriate. Mrs. Ashford's smile was professional ice. Of course. 3 days before the wedding, Eleanor's mother and brother came to visit. The butler showed them in with barely concealed disdain, and Eleanor rushed to embrace them in the foyer. "Mama, you look better." Her mother did look healthier, her color improved, her breathing easier. "The doctor Mr. Vandermeer sent is wonderful. He says with proper medicine and rest, I'll recover completely." James stared around the mansion with wide eyes. "This place is enormous. You could fit 50 families in here." "I know." Eleanor led them to a sitting room, painfully aware of how out of place they looked among the silk and crystal. "How are things at home?" "We don't have a home anymore," James said. "Mr. Vandermeer's people came. They moved us to a new apartment in a better neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, Eleanor. 3, and hot water that actually runs hot." Eleanor's throat tightened. Vandermeer was keeping his promises. She hadn't expected that. Her mother took her hands, studying her face. "Are you happy?" "I'm, adjusting." "That's not what I asked." Eleanor looked at her mother's concerned eyes, her brother's worried expression, and forced a smile. "I'm fine, really. Mr. Vandermeer is keeping his word. That's all that matters." But later, alone in her enormous bedroom, Eleanor admitted the truth to herself. She wasn't fine, she was terrified. In 3 days, she would marry a man she barely knew, join a world that despised her, and spend a year pretending to be someone she wasn't. And there was no escape. The night before the wedding, Vandermeer knocked on her door. She opened it to find him holding a small velvet box. "I thought you might want this now rather than tomorrow." Inside was a ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the stones catching light like captured stars. It was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen. It was also a shackle. "It's lovely," she said quietly. "It was my grandmother's. She wore it for 60 years. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Tomorrow this becomes real. Are you ready?" "No, but I'll do it anyway. That's all I ask." He hesitated, then added, "Eleanor, I know this isn't what you wanted for your life. I know I'm asking you to sacrifice a great deal, but I promise I'll make it worth it. You've already given me what I need. The rest is just details." "Is it?" His eyes searched hers. "Because it seems like more than details to me." Before she could respond, he left, and Eleanor was alone with a diamond ring and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on her chest. She didn't sleep that night. The wedding morning dawned clear and cold. Mary helped Eleanor into a gown of white silk and lace, a creation so beautiful it hurt to look at. In the mirror, Eleanor saw a bride who could have stepped from a fairy tale. But fairy tales were lies. The church was packed with society's elite, all dressed in their finest, all whispering behind gloved hands. Eleanor walked down the aisle on James's arm, seeing their stares, their judgment, their barely concealed hostility, and there at the altar stood William Vandermeer. For a moment their eyes met, and Eleanor saw something unexpected in his gaze. Not love. They'd been honest about that, but something else. Solidarity, perhaps, or mutual recognition of two people trapped in circumstances neither had chosen. The ceremony blurred. Eleanor repeated words she barely heard, made promises she wasn't sure she could keep. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vandermeer kissed her briefly, a formal touch of lips that meant nothing and everything. The reception was held at Vandermeer House, transforming the mansion into something from a dream. Hundreds of guests ate, drank, and pretended to celebrate, while actually dissecting every detail of the scandalous marriage. Eleanor stood beside her new husband, smiling until her face hurt, accepting congratulations from people who clearly wished her dead. "How charming," one woman said, her smile sharp as glass. "A real Cinderella story." "Except Cinderella had a fairy godmother," another added. "What do you have, dear?" "Just ambition." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I have exactly what I need. Do you?" The woman's smile froze. Eleanor moved on, Vandermeer's hand steady at her back. "Well played," he murmured. "I'm learning." "Quickly, that's good. You'll need every skill you have for what's coming." "And what is coming?" "War," Vandermeer said simply. "Marcus won't accept this quietly. He'll fight, and when he does, it won't be clean or fair. Then we'll fight back." "We?" He looked at her with something like approval. "You're already thinking like a partner. I'm thinking like a survivor. There's a difference." The party continued into the night. Eleanor danced with strangers, made conversation with people who despised her, and played the role of happy bride with exhausting precision. By the time the last guest left, she could barely stand. Vandermeer walked her to her room, the first time they'd been truly alone all day. "You did well," he said. "I lied well. There's a difference. In our world, they're the same thing." He paused at her door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, the real work begins." "What real work?" teaching society that you're not just my wife, you're a force they'll have to reckon with. He left her there, and Eleanor entered her room, closing the door on her wedding day. Mary helped her out of the beautiful dress, and Eleanor stood in her undergarments, looking at her reflection. Mrs. William Vandermeer, a name that felt like wearing someone else's skin. She climbed into bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. Somewhere in this enormous house, Vandermeer was probably working in his study, already planning his next business move. They were married now, legally bound but still strangers. For 1 year, this would be her life. Eleanor closed her eyes and prayed she was strong enough to survive it. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit the like button. Your support means everything and helps us know you want more dramatic historical romances like this one. Being Mrs. Vandermeer was harder than any work Eleanor had ever done. The physical labor of sewing 16 hours a day paled in comparison to the exhausting performance of playing society wife. Every morning began with Mary laying out clothes chosen to send specific messages. The green silk today, miss. You're receiving callers, and Mrs. Astor's daughter will be among them. Green shows confidence without aggression. Eleanor learned that everything communicated something. The tilt of her hat, the shade of her gloves, how she held her teacup. Society was a language of symbols, and one wrong gesture could destroy carefully constructed reputations. The callers came daily, curious women who wanted to inspect the working girl who'd captured New York's most eligible bachelor. They sat in Eleanor's drawing room drinking tea and asking questions designed to expose her ignorance. Tell me, Mrs. Vandermeer, did you attend Miss Porter's school, or perhaps the Chapin School? Neither. I attended public school until I was 14, then worked to support my family. Shocked silence, then forced smiles. How industrious. Eleanor learned to turn every insult into armor. They wanted her to be ashamed of her background. She would speak of it proudly, forcing them to either accept it or reveal their own snobbery. My father was a foreman for the Vandermeer Railroad. He built the infrastructure that made this city's wealth possible. I'm quite proud of that legacy. It was a calculated risk, invoking her father's death at Vandermeer events. But it worked. Some women softened, recognizing genuine grief beneath her pride. Others remained hostile, but at least they respected her refusal to apologize for existing. Vandermeer watched her navigate society with approval that felt uncomfortably like respect. You're doing better than I expected, he said one evening over dinner. They'd progressed to sitting at the same end of the table, close enough for actual conversation. You expected me to fail? I expected you to struggle. Instead, you're thriving. I'm surviving. There's a difference. Is there? He studied her thoughtfully. You've turned half of society's matrons from enemies to allies in 3 weeks. That's more than surviving. Eleanor set down her fork. They're not allies. They're just less openly hostile. It's not the same thing. In our world, it is. She hated that he kept saying our world, as if she belonged here. This would never be her world. She was just visiting for a year, collecting her payment, and escaping back to reality. But reality was changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her mother's health continued improving. James had enrolled in a private academy, receiving education Eleanor had only dreamed of. The doctor reported her mother's lungs were healing, the consumption retreating under proper medical care. Everything Vandermeer had promised was coming true. That should have made Eleanor happy. Instead, it made her uneasy. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. The blow came 6 weeks into the marriage. Eleanor was in the morning room reading invitations. Society had decided to accept her, at least superficially, when Vandermeer entered. His face was grim. We have a problem. What kind of problem? He handed her a newspaper. The headline made her stomach drop. Vandermeer Railroad under investigation. Unsafe working conditions alleged. The article detailed accidents, injuries, deaths. It painted a picture of a company that valued profit over human life, that cut corners on safety to increase margins, and it specifically mentioned Thomas Hartwell's death 3 years ago. Eleanor's hand shook as she read. Is this true? Some of it. The accidents happened. We've had safety issues at several sites. You knew? You knew and you didn't fix it? I'm fixing it now. I've implemented new protocols, hired independent inspectors, exactly as I promised you. But change takes time, and Marcus knows that. Marcus, Eleanor's voice went cold. He's behind this article. He's been investigating the company for months, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. Our marriage gave him that moment. So this is my fault. This is Marcus's fault for being a vindictive bastard who'd rather destroy the company than let me run it. Vandermeer's jaw was tight with anger. But yes, your presence makes a better story. Railroad baron marries worker's daughter, but still runs unsafe operations. It suggests hypocrisy. Eleanor stood, pacing the room. What do? We fight back. I've prepared a response detailing every reform we've implemented. We'll run it in all the major papers. That's not enough. What else do you suggest? Eleanor thought quickly, her mind racing. Let me speak to the workers. Not as your wife, but as Thomas Hartwell's daughter. Let me tell them about the changes you're making, the new safety measures. If they believe me, if they publicly support the reforms, it undermines Marcus's narrative. Vandermeer looked at her with surprise. You'd do that? Defend the company that killed your father? I defend the truth. You're making real changes. Marcus isn't. If speaking up helps ensure those changes continue, then yes, I'll do it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, you continue to surprise me, Eleanor. Is that a yes? It's a yes. I'll arrange a meeting at the main rail yard. Tomorrow afternoon. That night, Eleanor lay awake, wondering what she was doing. 6 weeks ago, she'd hated the Vandermeer Railroad. Now she was preparing to defend it publicly. Had she sold out so completely, or was she just being practical? Vandermeer was keeping his promises. The reforms were real. Workers would benefit from his continued control of the company. Supporting him wasn't betrayal. It was strategy. She repeated that to herself until she almost believed it. The rail yard was exactly as Eleanor remembered from childhood visits with her father. The smell of grease and coal, the sound of hammers on metal, the sight of men doing back-breaking work for wages that barely fed their families. A crowd had gathered. Workers, their families, reporters eager for scandal. Eleanor stood on a platform beside Vandermeer, feeling their stares. To them, she was a traitor, a working-class girl who'd married rich and forgotten where she came from. She had to change that perception. My name is Eleanor Hartwell Vandermeer, she began, her voice carrying across the yard. 3 years ago, my father, Thomas Hartwell, died here. A scaffolding collapse that should never have happened. A death that should have been prevented. The crowd murmured. She had their attention. When my father died, your company paid my mother $50 and told her to be grateful. We weren't grateful. We were devastated. We were betrayed. Because the Vandermeer Railroad had promised my father safety measures that didn't exist, pensions that were never paid, care for families that never came. Vandermeer shifted beside her. This wasn't the speech they'd discussed, but Eleanor couldn't lie to these people. They deserved truth, even if it was uncomfortable. I married William Vandermeer 6 weeks ago. Not for love, I'll be honest about that. I married him because my family was drowning and he offered a lifeline. But I demanded something in exchange for that marriage. Real reforms, real changes, real safety measures that would prevent other families from suffering what mine did. She pulled papers from her bag, holding them up. These are the new safety protocols implemented at every Vandermeer Railroad site. Independent inspections every month. Safety equipment provided at company expense, full pensions for families of workers killed on the job, medical care for injured employees. A worker in the front shouted, "Promises! We've heard promises before. You have, Eleanor agreed. And you were lied to. But I'm Thomas Hartwell's daughter. I know what broken promises cost. I won't let this company break more. She looked directly at Vandermeer. And if Mr. Vandermeer fails to honor these commitments, I'll be the first person to expose him. You have my word on that. The crowd's murmuring intensified. Eleanor continued, her voice stronger now. There's a man named Marcus Vandermeer who wants control of this company. He's the one behind the newspaper articles exposing safety violations. But ask yourselves, if he cares so much about worker safety, why did he wait years to speak up? Why release this information now, during a legal battle, instead of immediately when violations occurred? Because he doesn't care about you. He cares about power, and under his leadership there will be no reforms, no safety equipment, no pensions, nothing but the same broken promises that killed my father. She folded the papers, her hands steady. I can't bring my father back, but I can help prevent other daughters from losing their fathers. That's why I'm standing here, not to defend the Vandermeer Railroad's past. That past is indefensible, but to fight for its future, a future where workers go home alive at the end of their shifts. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, slowly, a few workers began nodding. One raised his hand. My brother lost 3 fingers last year. No compensation, no medical care. You're saying that changes? I'm saying it already has changed. Every worker injured in the past month has received full medical care and compensation. Check the records if you don't believe me. Another worker. And if we're killed, our families get pensions? Full pensions. I have the contracts. I'll show them to anyone who wants to see. The crowd's hostility began shifting. Not to trust. Trust had to be earned over time, but to cautious hope. That was enough. A reporter pushed forward. Mrs. Vandermeer, are you saying these reforms are a direct result of your marriage? I'm saying they're a direct result of holding powerful people accountable. My marriage gave me leverage to demand changes. I used that leverage. Now it's up to the company to prove those changes are real and lasting. Later, in the carriage back to Vandermeer House, Eleanor and her husband sat in tense silence. Finally, Vandermeer spoke. That wasn't the speech we agreed on. I know. You threatened to expose me if I failed to honor my commitments. I did. In front of reporters who will quote you in tomorrow's papers. I'm aware. Vandermeer looked at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. I prefer brave. So do I. His smile faded. But you've painted a target on your back. Marcus will see that speech as a declaration of war. Good. Let him. I'm done being afraid of powerful men who think they can control everything. Including me? Especially you. The words hung between them, charged with something Eleanor couldn't quite name. Not hostility, but not friendship either. Something more complicated. Eleanor, Vandermeer said quietly, I meant what I said in the contract. Every promise I made, I'll keep, not because you threaten me publicly, but because it's the right thing to do. Then we have nothing to worry about. Don't we? His eyes were serious. Because I think we both know this stopped being a simple business arrangement weeks ago. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. What do you mean? I mean, you're not just playing a role anymore. You're actually fighting for those reforms. You actually care about those workers. This isn't performance. It's real, and that's a problem. It's dangerous. The more you care, the more you have to lose, and people like Marcus will exploit that. Eleanor looked out the window at the city passing by. I've had everything to lose since the day my father died. Caring about something bigger than survival is the first real choice I've made in 3 years. I'm not giving that up, even if it costs you. Especially then. They rode the rest of the way in silence. But something had shifted between them. They were still playing roles, still maintaining appearances. But underneath the performance, something genuine was taking root. Eleanor wasn't sure if that was terrifying or exhilarating. Possibly both. The next morning's papers covered Eleanor's speech extensively. Reactions were mixed. Vandermeer's working-class wife, champion or opportunist. Eleanor Vandermeer challenges company to keep promises. Railroad workers cautiously optimistic after unusual speech. Public opinion was splitting. Some saw Eleanor as a genuine advocate. Others viewed her as a clever actress playing both sides, but everyone was talking about her. That afternoon, Marcus Vandermeer appeared at the house. Eleanor was in the garden when the butler announced him. She found him in the drawing room, sprawled in a chair like he owned it. "Eleanor, or should I call you cousin now? You can call me Mrs. Vandermeer and then leave." Marcus laughed. "Direct. I like that. My cousin chose well, even if his choice was unconventional." "What do you want, Marcus?" "To offer you a better deal." He stood, moving closer. "William's using you. You know that, right? This whole marriage is just a legal maneuver to keep control of the company. Once he has what he needs, you'll be discarded. And you're different? I'm honest about my ambitions. I want the company, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it, but I don't pretend to be noble while doing it." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This is a contract. Testify that William married you under false pretenses. Help me prove the marriage is fraudulent, and I'll pay you $200,000, double what he's giving you." Eleanor took the envelope but didn't open it. "You want me to destroy my own marriage?" "I want you to be smart. William will betray you eventually. Why wait for that? Take my offer, secure your future, and walk away clean." "And the workers? The reforms?" Marcus shrugged. "Workers are replaceable. They'll adapt to whatever leadership they get." There it was. The difference between Vandermeer and his cousin laid bare. William was ruthless, but believed in some level of responsibility. Marcus saw people as expendable resources. Eleanor set the envelope on the table. "No, you're making a mistake. I'm making a choice. There's a difference." Marcus's expression hardened. "Then you're choosing the wrong side, and when this falls apart, and it will, don't expect mercy." He left, and Eleanor stood alone in the drawing room, staring at the envelope containing $200,000. Double her settlement. Financial security beyond her wildest dreams, and all she had to do was betray Vandermeer. She thought about it. Not seriously, but enough to imagine what that money could do, the life it could buy, the freedom it represented. Then she thought about the workers at the rail yard, the hope in their eyes when she promised changes, the responsibility she'd taken on when she made that speech. Eleanor picked up the envelope and threw it in the fireplace, watched it burn until nothing remained but ash. When Vandermeer came home that evening, she told him about Marcus's visit. "He offered you $200,000. Vandermeer's voice was carefully neutral. "Yes, and you refused." "Obviously, since I'm telling you about it." "Why? That's twice what I'm paying you." Eleanor met his eyes. "Because you're keeping your promises, and he won't. Because those workers deserve better than Marcus. And because," she hesitated, "because this marriage might have started as a business arrangement, but it's become something more. At least for me." Vandermeer was silent for a long moment. Then, "For me, too." 3 words that changed everything. "William, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't say anything else. We still have 10 months left on our contract. Let's not complicate this further." But it was already complicated. They both knew it. That night, Eleanor lay in bed thinking about impossible things. About a marriage that was supposed to be temporary, becoming permanent. About a man she'd started this journey hating, but now, what? Respected. Trusted? Cared about? The thought terrified her more than any of Marcus's threats, because falling for William Vandermeer wasn't part of the plan. It was a deviation that could destroy everything she'd worked for. And yet, as she drifted towards sleep, Eleanor admitted the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. It might already be too late to stop it. The scandal broke 2 weeks later with the force of a locomotive crash. Eleanor woke to shouting in the hallway. She emerged from her room to find Vandermeer standing with a newspaper, his face pale with rage. "What happened?" He handed her the paper without speaking. The headline screamed across the front page, "Vandermeer marriage a sham. Railroad, a paid bride for legal purposes." The article detailed everything. The contract, the one-year timeline, the financial settlement. Every private detail of their arrangement laid bare for public consumption. Someone had leaked the truth, and now all of New York knew their marriage was a calculated business transaction. Eleanor's hands shook as she read. How did they get this information? Marcus. It has to be. He must have someone in my legal team. What do we do? Vandermeer's jaw was tight. We deny it. Call it slander. Threaten lawsuits. No. He looked at her sharply. What? We don't deny it. We confirm it. Have you lost your mind? If we confirm this, society will eviscerate you. The marriage could be declared fraudulent. I'll lose the company. Listen to me. Eleanor grabbed his arm, forcing him to focus. If we deny it, they'll investigate. They'll find the contract, talk to lawyers, dig up every detail. We'll look like liars, and the truth will come out anyway. But if we confirm it and explain why, we control the narrative. Explain how. Yes, I bought a wife because my grandfather wrote a ridiculous will. That makes me look pathetic. No, we tell them I agreed to marry you to help my family and secure reforms for workers. We make this about practicality and mutual benefit, not deception. We turn a scandal into a story about two people making unconventional but honest choices. Vandermeer stared at her. That could actually work. I know. But it requires you to publicly admit you married me for money. I did marry you for money, along with other reasons, but yes, money was the primary motivation. I'm not ashamed of that. Eleanor lifted her chin. I did what I had to do to survive. If society can't accept that, then society can go to hell. A slow smile crossed Vandermeer's face. You're extraordinary, you know that? I'm practical. There's a difference. Not in my experience. Beardidis. They held the press conference that afternoon. Every major newspaper sent reporters, and the drawing room was packed with journalists hungry for scandal. Vandermeer stood beside Eleanor, his hand at the small of her back, supportive, not controlling. They'd written no script, made no rehearsals. This would be raw and honest, or it would be nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, Vandermeer began, you've read today's article about my marriage. I'm here to confirm that the basic facts are accurate. Eleanor and I married with a contract that specified terms and duration. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. However, the article fails to mention why we chose this arrangement. My grandfather's will created an impossible situation. Marry by 30, or lose control of the company to someone unqualified to run it. Rather than enter a traditional society marriage based on mutual deception, I chose honesty. I approached Eleanor with a business proposition. Eleanor stepped forward. I was a seamstress, supporting my family after my father's death, working for this company, when Mr. Vandermeer offered marriage with specific terms, including financial security and labor reforms. I accepted. Not because I was naive or desperate, but because it was a smart decision that benefited everyone involved. A reporter shouted, "So you admit you married for money?" I admit I married for survival. My mother was dying because we couldn't afford medical care. My brother was destroying his body doing dangerous work. At 15, Mr. Vandermeer offered a solution that helped my family while allowing him to maintain control of his company. We were honest with each other about expectations. That's more than most society marriages can claim. Another reporter, but isn't this marriage fraud? How is it fraud? Vandermeer's voice carried steel. We married legally. We live as husband and wife. We fulfill every legal requirement. The fact that our marriage serves practical purposes doesn't make it fraudulent. It makes it honest. What about love? Someone called. Marriage should be based on love. Eleanor felt Vandermeer stiffen beside her. This was the question they'd avoided. the truth they hadn't examined even with each other. Love, Eleanor said slowly, is complicated. Did we marry in love? No. Have we come to care for each other over these past months? Yes. Will that care develop into something deeper? I don't know. But I'd rather build toward love honestly than start with romantic illusions that crumble under reality's weight. She felt Vandermeer's hand tighten on her back. Agreement? Surprise? She couldn't tell. The questions continued for another hour. Eleanor and Vandermeer answered them all with unflinching honesty, refusing to be ashamed of their choices. By the end, the mood in the room had shifted. Not to approval exactly, but to grudging respect. When the reporters finally left, Eleanor collapsed into a chair. Did we just commit social suicide? Possibly. Or we just redefined the rules. Vandermeer poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing her one. Either way, it's done. No taking it back now. Do you regret it? Do you? Eleanor sipped her whiskey, considering. No. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending. If society can't handle the truth, that's their problem. Agreed. Vandermeer raised his glass. To honesty, then. However uncomfortable it makes people. They drank, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. The performance was over. Whatever came next would be real, for better or worse. The newspapers the next day were savage. Vandermeer couple admits marriage is business deal. Love for sale. Railroad heir and working girl defend contractual marriage. Society shocked by candid admission of mercenary union. But underneath the scandal, something else was happening. Letters began arriving at Vandermeer House, not from society, but from working people. Women who'd married for security, men who'd made practical choices, people who recognized themselves in Eleanor and Vandermeer's story. Thank you for your honesty. My husband and I married because we needed each other's support. We learned to love each other over time. There's no shame in that. You're brave to admit what so many of us hide. Marriage is about survival as much as romance. My daughter asks me if she should marry for love or security. I'll show her your story and tell her she can have both if she's patient. Eleanor read the letters with tears in her eyes. They'd expected condemnation. Instead, they'd found understanding from unexpected quarters. But Marcus wasn't finished. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. Marcus was challenging the marriage's legality, arguing that a contract-based marriage violated the spirit of the wills marriage requirement. The case would go to court in 1 month. If he wins, Vandermeer explained, the marriage is declared fraudulent, I lose the company, and your settlement becomes void. So we fight. We fight? But Eleanor, this will get ugly. Marcus will dig into every aspect of your life, every moment of our marriage. He'll try to prove we're not a real couple. Then we prove we are. How? By pretending we're in love. Eleanor met his eyes. By showing that real marriage is about partnership, trust, and mutual respect. We have all of those things, maybe not in the way society expects, but we have them. Over the next weeks, they prepared for trial. Their lawyers coached them, rehearsed questions, built arguments around the validity of modern marriage choices. But the strongest preparation happened naturally, in quiet moments that revealed the truth of their relationship. One evening, Eleanor found Vandermeer in his study, staring at reports from the rail yards. Another injury today, despite all our safety measures. His voice was heavy with frustration. Eleanor read over his shoulder, but it was minor, and the worker received immediate medical care. That's different from before. It's still an injury that shouldn't have happened. You can't prevent every accident, William. You can only minimize them and care for people when they occur. You're doing both. He looked up at her, something vulnerable in his expression. I want to be better than my father, better than every Vandermeer who came before. You already are. How do you know? Because my father worked for your father. He saw how that company operated. You're nothing like that. Eleanor touched his shoulder gently. You're trying. That's more than they ever did. Moments like that accumulated. building a foundation of genuine connection beneath their legal arrangement. They began spending evenings together not because the contract required it, but because they enjoyed each other's company. They shared meals, discussed business, argued about politics, laughed at ridiculous society gossip. One night, Eleanor woke from a nightmare about her father's death. She found herself in Vandermeer's study before realizing she'd sought him out unconsciously. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" She started to leave, embarrassed, but he stood, crossing to her with concern in his eyes. "Bad dream. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Stay." He guided her to the sofa, pouring her water. "Tell me about it." And she did. Told him about watching her father leave for work that final morning, about the company messenger who'd arrived with news of the accident, about her mother's screams. All the pain she'd buried under survival's necessities came pouring out. Vandermeer listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said simply, "I'm sorry for all of it, for what my company did to your family, for every broken promise, for every way we failed people like your father. It wasn't your fault. You were just a child. But I inherited the responsibility and the guilt." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Eleanor realized she felt safer in this moment than she had in years. Not because Vandermeer was powerful or wealthy, but because he understood, because he cared. "William," she said softly, "what happened to us? We were supposed to keep this simple." "I don't think we were ever simple people, Eleanor. We just tried to make a simple arrangement, and failed spectacularly, or succeeded in ways we didn't expect." The trial began on a cold November morning. The courtroom was packed with society's elite, all eager to watch the scandal unfold. Marcus's lawyers were ruthless. They painted Eleanor as a fortune hunter, Vandermeer as a cold manipulator, and the marriage as a complete fraud. This was a business transaction, nothing more. They signed a contract with an expiration date. That's not marriage, it's employment. But when Eleanor took the stand, she spoke with quiet conviction. "Yes, we signed a contract. Yes, there were financial terms, but marriage has always involved practical considerations. Throughout history, marriages have been arranged for alliances, land, money, social position. We simply acknowledge those realities openly, instead of hiding behind romantic pretense." "But do you love your husband?" Eleanor looked directly at Vandermeer, seeing him tense in anticipation of her answer. "When I married him, I barely knew him. Now, I respect him. I trust him. I admire his integrity and his commitment to doing better. Is that love? I'm not sure. But it's real. And it's growing. And isn't that what all good marriages should do? Grow over time?" The courtroom murmured. This wasn't the answer they'd expected. When Vandermeer took the stand, he was asked the same question. "Do you love your wife, Mr. Vandermeer?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, "I didn't plan to. This was supposed to be a clean business arrangement. But Eleanor is the strongest, bravest, most principled person I've ever met. She challenges me. She makes me better. She refuses to let me take the easy path. Do I love her? I'm starting to think I might." Eleanor's breath caught. They'd never discussed this, never acknowledged the feelings growing between them. Now he was confessing them in open court. Marcus's lawyer tried to paint this as performance, but the emotion was too raw, too real. Even the judge looked moved. The trial lasted 3 days. Both sides presented evidence, called witnesses, built arguments. But ultimately, it came down to one question. Was a contract-based marriage still a valid marriage? The judge deliberated for 2 days. When the verdict came, the courtroom held its collective breath. After careful consideration, this court finds that the Vandermeer marriage, while unconventional, meets all legal requirements for validity. A marriage contract specifying terms does not invalidate the union, particularly when both parties are fulfilling those terms in good faith. The marriage stands. Case dismissed. Eleanor felt her knees weaken with relief. Vandermeer caught her arm, steadying her. "We won," he said quietly. "We survived." "Same thing." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. This time, Eleanor and Vandermeer faced them together, hands linked. "Are you satisfied with the verdict?" "We're satisfied with the truth," Eleanor said. "Marriage takes many forms. Ours might be different, but it's no less valid." "What happens now?" Vandermeer looked at Eleanor, something unspoken passing between them. "Now we continue building something real. If you've followed this story from the beginning and want to see how it all ends, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We have more incredible historical romance stories coming your way." 5 years later, Eleanor stood in the garden of Vandermeer House, watching her daughter chase butterflies through the rose bushes. Charlotte was 3 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit. "Careful, darling," Eleanor called. "Don't trip." "I won't, Mama." Eleanor smiled, one hand resting on her rounded belly. Their second child would arrive in 3 months. And already, Charlotte was practicing being a big sister by bossing around her stuffed animals. Footsteps approached, and Vandermeer's arms wrapped around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on her stomach. "How are you feeling?" "Large, tired, happy." He kissed her temple. "The new safety measures at the Philadelphia yard are working. No injuries in 6 months." "That's wonderful. And your brother sent word from university. He's top of his class in engineering." Eleanor leaned back against him, grateful for his strength. Mama would be so proud. They'd lost Eleanor's mother 2 years ago, her lungs finally giving out despite the best medical care. But she'd lived long enough to meet Charlotte, to see Eleanor genuinely happy, to know her daughter had found not just security but love. "I heard from Marcus," Vandermeer said quietly. Eleanor turned in his arms. "What did he want?" "To apologize, actually. He's getting married himself, to a woman he loves. Says he finally understands what we have." "And what is that?" Vandermeer smiled, the expression transforming his face into something younger, lighter. "A partnership built on honesty that became love built on respect. The best kind of marriage, really." Eleanor touched his face gently. "You know, I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For offering me that contract 5 years ago. For being honest about what you needed. For keeping every promise you made. You kept yours too. I did more than that. I fell in love with you." "When?" Vandermeer asked softly. "When did you know?" Eleanor thought back through years of gradual discovery. "I think it was during the trial, when you admitted you might love me. Before that, I was too busy protecting myself to notice what I was feeling, but hearing you say those words, I couldn't deny it anymore." "I knew earlier," Vandermeer admitted. "The night you burned Marcus's contract. You chose me when you had every reason not to. That's when I realized this wasn't business anymore." Charlotte ran up, demanding her father's attention. Vandermeer scooped her up, and Eleanor watched them together, her husband and daughter, the family she'd never dared dream she could have. "Come on," Vandermeer said, extending his free hand to Eleanor. "Let's go inside. Mrs. Davies made your favorite dessert." As they walked toward the house, Charlotte chattering between them, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 5 years ago, she'd been a desperate seamstress. Agreeing to a love proud had been her armor for so long. But she'd learned something crucial. Accepting help wasn't weakness. Building something with another person wasn't surrender. Love didn't require sacrifice. It could be partnership. Society had eventually accepted them, though it took years. Eleanor's advocacy for workers' rights had earned grudging respect, even from families who'd initially scorned her. She'd used her position to push for reforms across multiple industries, proving that a working-class girl could make real change from inside the system. The Vandermeer Railroad Company had become a model for labor relations, implementing safety standards that other companies eventually adopted. Thomas Hartwell's death hadn't been meaningless. It had sparked changes that saved countless lives. As they entered the house, James arrived for dinner. He was 20 now, tall and confident, preparing to graduate as a civil engineer. He'd never forgotten where he came from, and his designs prioritized worker safety above all else. "Eleanor," he hugged her carefully, mindful of her pregnancy. "You look radiant. I look enormous." "Same thing." James grinned, then turned to Vandermeer. "I have news. The bridge project was approved. We start construction next month." "Using your new safety protocols?" "Every single one. And I'm hiring from the neighborhoods we grew up in, giving people the opportunities we never had." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Hormones made her emotional, but this was more than that. This was seeing her family not just survive, but thrive, her father's legacy living on through his son. Dinner was chaotic and perfect. Charlotte insisted on sitting between her parents. James told stories about university, and Vandermeer shared news about expansion plans that included unprecedented worker benefits. They were a family built from necessity that had become something irreplaceable. Later, after Charlotte was asleep and James had left, Eleanor and Vandermeer sat in their private sitting room. It had become their sanctuary, the place where they could shed their public personas and simply be William and Eleanor. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Eleanor asked. "When you proposed in the restaurant?" "All the time. I was so certain I had everything calculated. A simple arrangement with clear parameters." "We weren't very good at simple." "No." He pulled her closer, his hand resting on her stomach where their child grew. "Thank God for that." Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago. Angry, desperate, proud to the point of stubbornness. That girl had agreed to marry for survival, but somewhere along the way, survival had transformed into living, really living, not just enduring. "William? I love you." He smiled against her hair. "I know. You tell me every day. I'll tell you every day for the rest of our lives. You deserve to hear it." "So do you." He turned her face toward his. "I love you, Eleanor. Not because of any contract, not because of convenience, but because you're the most remarkable person I've ever known. You took an impossible situation and turned it into something beautiful. We did it together." "Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, New York City continued its endless motion, carriages rattling past, people pursuing their dreams, the great machine of society grinding forward. But inside Vandermeer House, time slowed to something precious. Eleanor thought about all the women who'd marry for security without love, all the men who'd marry for obligation without respect. She thought about her younger self, so certain that accepting help meant losing independence. She'd been wrong about so many things. The best partnerships weren't about one person saving another. They were about two people choosing to build something together, even when the foundation seemed impossible, especially then. Charlotte cried out in her sleep, and Eleanor started to rise, but Vandermeer stopped her. "I'll go. You rest." She watched him leave, this man who'd offered her a contract and given her a life, who'd promised reforms and delivered revolution, who'd proposed marriage for legal purposes and delivered love that felt like coming home. 5 years ago, she'd walked into a trap, baited with desperation. She'd walked out with everything she'd never known she wanted, and if she could go back to that scared seamstress reading a newspaper headline about a railroad magnate, she'd tell her this: take the risk, sign the contract, walk into the unknown, because sometimes the best things in life start with impossible choices, and sometimes poor but proud girls marry powerful men and discover that real wealth has nothing to do with money. It's about waking up next to your partner and knowing you'd choose them again. Every single day. Eleanor rested her hand on her stomach, feeling their child move. This baby would be born into security, but also into love. They would know their grandfather's story, understand the cost of survival, and learn that strength sometimes means accepting help. Vandermeer returned, settling beside her with a soft smile. She's already asleep again. Just needed to know we were close, like her mother. Eleanor murmured. Like both her parents, he corrected. They sat together until the fire burned low, two people who'd started as strangers, become partners, and evolved into soulmates. The contract that brought them together had expired years ago, but the promises they made to each other every day, those would last forever. Sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with passion, they begin with pragmatism. Eleanor and William Vandermeer's journey teaches us that honest foundations can support extraordinary buildings. They started with a contract, but built a marriage. They began as business partners and became soulmates. They married for survival and found joy. Their story reminds us that accepting help isn't weakness, that practical choices can lead to profound love, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we need someone else. Eleanor didn't lose herself by marrying William. She found herself by choosing partnership over pride. In a world that demands we choose between security and love, between survival and authenticity, the Vandermeers proved we can have both. Not through luck or fairy tale magic, but through honest communication, mutual respect, and the courage to build something real from unconventional beginnings. So if you're facing an impossible choice, remember Eleanor standing outside that restaurant, terrified but determined. Remember that some of life's best gifts come wrapped in scary packages. And remember that love, real, lasting, transformative love, can grow anywhere, even in soil that seems too harsh to support it. All it takes is two people willing to try. Now we'd love to hear from you. What did you think about Eleanor's journey from seamstress to society wife? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to watch the next captivating story appearing on your screen right now.